Welcome back, my friends, to this last episode of Egil Saga, where we will be finishing off the saga today. It's a very special episode. Let's dive in. Egil Skallagrimsson went to the assembly slope the following day together with Thorstein and all their men. Onund and Steinar were there too, and Tungu Odd and Einar. When everyone had stated their cases, Egil stood up and asked, "Are Steinar and his father Onund here and able to hear what I am saying?" Onund said they were. "Then I will pronounce the settlement between Steinar and Thorstein. I will begin my statement with my father Grim's arrival in Iceland, when he took all the land of Mirar and around the district, and made his home at Borg. He designated that land for his farm, but gave his friends the outlying lands which they settled later. He gave Ani a place to live at Annabrekka, where Onund and Steinar have lived until now. And we all know, Steinar, where the boundary lies between Borg and Annabrekka. The brook at Hafslake separates them. It was not by accident that you grazed your cattle on Thorstein's land, Steinar, and seized his property, expecting him to be such a disgrace to his family that he would let you get away with robbing him. You are well aware, Steinar and Onund, that Ani accepted that land from my father Grim. When Thorstein killed 2 of your slaves, it is obvious to everyone that they fell by their own doing. Do not qualify for compensation. Even if they were free men, they would be considered criminals and thereby not qualify for compensation. Yet since you, Steinar, planned to rob my son Thorstein of his land, which he took over with my approval and I had inherited from my father, you will forfeit your land at Annabrekka and be paid nothing for it. Furthermore, you will not make your home or accept lodging in this district on the south side of the river Langa, and leave Annabrekka before the end of the moving days, and be rightfully killed by Thorstein or any man who is ready to grant Thorstein his assistance after that time, if you refuse to leave or to abide by any of these stipulations I have made towards you." When Egil sat down, Thorstein named witnesses to his settlement. Then Onund Sjoni said, "Everyone will agree, Egil, that the settlement you have made and delivered here is unjust. For my part, I have made every effort to prevent the trouble between them. But from now on I will not restrain myself from any inconvenience I can cause to Thorstein." "On the contrary," said Egil, "I expect you and your son's lot to worsen, the longer that our quarrel lasts. I would have thought you realized, Onund, that I have always held my own against people like you and your son. And Odd and Einar, who are so interested in this matter, have received the honor they deserve from it." Thorgir Blund, Egil's nephew, was at the assembly and had supported Thorstein strongly in the case. He asked Egil and Thorstein to grant him some land in Mirar. He had been living on the south side of Vita, below the lake called Blundsvatn. Snooze Lake. Egil took his request well, and Thorstein urged his father to let him move there. They gave Thorgir Annabrekka to live in, while Steinar moved his home to the other side of Langa and settled at Laudalake. Egil rode off home to Ness, and he and his son parted on warm terms. There is a man named Eiri, who is a member of Thorstein's household, very swift of foot and exceptionally sharp-sighted. Although he was a foreigner and a freedman, he was in charge of watching over Thorstein's sheep, which mainly involved rounding up the sheep that were unsuitable for milking, and driving them up the mountains in spring, and rounding them up again for penning in autumn. After the moving days, Thorstein had the sheep rounded up which had been left behind in the spring, and planned to drive them up in the mountains. Eiri was in the fold, but Thorstein and his farmhands, 8 of them altogether, rode off to the mountains. Thorstein built a fence right across Grisartunga, between Langavatn and Grufure, and sent a number of men to work on it in the spring. After inspecting the farmhand's work, he rode home, and as he was passing the site of the assembly, Eiri came running up from the opposite direction and said he wanted to talk to him in private. Thorstein told his companions to ride ahead while they talked. Eiri told Thorstein that they had been up to Einkunnur earlier that day to keep an eye on the sheep. And in the woods above the winter track, he said, I saw the glint of 12 spears and several shields. Thorstein answered in a loud enough voice for his companions to hear him clearly. Why does he want to see me so badly I can't even ride home? Olvald must know that I am unlikely to refuse to speak to him when he's ill. Ari ran up the mountain as fast as he could. Then Thorstein said to his companions, I want to make a detour and ride south to Olvedstatter. Olvad sent me word asking me to meet him. He'll think I owe him at least that for the ox he gave me last autumn, to go and see him when he thinks it's important. After that, Thorstein and his men rode south across the marshland above Stangarholt, then south to Gufa and along the riding path that skirts the river. On their way down from Vatn, they saw a large number of bulls on the south side of the river, and a man there with them. It was Olvad's farmhand. Thorstein asked him if everybody was well, and he said that they all were, and Olvad was in the woods chopping timber. Then go and tell him to go to Borg if he has any business with me, said Thorstein. I will ride home now. And then he did that. Later word went around that Steinar Sturluson had been lying in wait on Einkunnr with 11 men that same day. Thorstein pretended not to know, and everything remained quiet afterwards. There is a man named Thorgir, a kinsman and close friend of Thorstein's. At that time he was living at Alfdane's. Thorgir was in the habit of holding a feast every autumn. He went to see Thorstein Egilson to invite him. Thorstein accepted the invitation, and Thorgir went back home. On the appointed day, Thorstein made his preparations for the journey. This was 4 weeks before winter. A Norwegian and 2 of his farmhands went with him. Thorstein had a 10-year-old son named Grim, who went with him too, so that there were 5 of them when they rode out to Foss to cross Langa, then straight on to the river Aurida. On the other side of the river was a long and narrow road through which the path lay, and meadows west of the trees belonging to several farms. Steinar, Onund, and their farmhands were working there. When they recognized Thorstein, they ran for their weapons and set off in pursuit. And when Thorstein saw Steinar chasing them, he and his men rode from Langehold towards a high, narrow hill which was nearby. Thorstein and his men dismounted and set off up the hill, and he told the boy Grim to stay clear of their encounter and go into the woods. When Steinar and the others reached the hill, they attacked Thorstein and his men, and a battle ensued. There were 6 grown men on Steinar's side, as well as his 10-year-old son. People from nearby farms who were working in the meadows saw the 2 sides clash and ran over to separate them. By the time the fight was broken up, both of Thorstein's farmhands had been killed. One of Steinar's farmhands was dead, and the others were wounded. After the battle had been broken up, Thorstein went to look for Grim. They found him severely wounded, with Steinar's son lying dead beside him. As Thorstein jumped on his horse, Steinar called out to him, "Are you running away now, Thorstein the White?" Thorstein replied, "You'll run further before the week is past." Then Thorstein and his men rode over the marshland, taking Grim with them. When they reached the hillock that stands there, the boy died. They buried him on the hillock, and it was called Grimsholt afterwards. The hill where they had fought is also called Urrestuvol, Battle Hill. That evening Thorstein rode out to Alfdane's as he had planned, stayed at the feast for 3 days, and then prepared to go back home. People offered to accompany him, but he refused and set off with the Norwegian. Steinar rode out towards the shore on the day that he knew he could expect Thorstein to be riding home. He sat down on the sandbanks that start below Lamberstatter and was armed with a sword called Skrimir, an outstanding weapon. He stood on the bank with his sword drawn, his eyes focused on Thorstein, whom he saw riding along the edge of the sands. Lambi, who lived at Lamberstatter, saw what Steinar was doing. He set off from home and down to the sandbank, and when he reached Steinar, he grabbed his arms from behind. Steinar tried to shake him off, but Lambi held him tight, and they struggled down from the bank and onto level ground, just as Thorstein and his companion rode past along the track below. Steinar had ridden his horse there and had tethered it. The horse freed itself and galloped off along the shore. This surprised Thorstein and his companion when they saw it, because they had not noticed Steinar's movements. Not seeing Thorstein ride past, Steinar worked his way back to the sandbank, and when they reached the edge, Lambi caught him off his guard and pushed him off it. He tumbled onto the sands. Lambi ran home, and when Steinar got to his feet, he chased after him. When Lambi reached the door of his house, he ran inside and slammed it. Steinar swung a blow at him, but his sword stuck tight in the rafters. That was the end of their dealings, and Steinar went home. The day after Thorstein came back home, he sent his farmhand off to Leiralik to tell Steinar to move house beyond Borgarhrón and be gone by the next evening with everything he had, or he would take advantage of his greater power, and if I do, then you won't have the chance to leave. Steinar moved out to the coast at Snæfellsstrand and set up a farm at the place called Elidi, and that was the end of his dealings with Thorstein Egilsson. Thorgeir Blunt lived at Annabrekka and quarreled with Thorstein about everything he could. On one occasion, when Egil and Thorstein met, they talked at great length about their kinsman Thorgeir Blunt, and agreed entirely about him. Then Egil spoke with us first. In the past I pulled the land out of Steinar's hands with words, thinking I was working in Thorgeir's favor. My sister's son failed me, gave me golden promises, yet Snooze, to my astonishment, could not refrain from causing harm. Thorgeir Blunt left Annabrekka and went south to Flokkadal, because even though he was prepared to back down, Thorstein refused to have anything to do with him. Thorstein was a straightforward, just, and unimposing man, yet stood firm if others imposed on him, and proved a tough opponent when challenged. He and Tungu Odd were on cold terms after Steinar's case. Odd was a chieftain of Borgarfjord on the south side of Vita then. He was the Godi of the temple to which everyone living south of Skjardshidi paid tribute. Egil Skallagrim's son lived a long life, but in his old age he grew very frail, and both his hearing and sight failed. He also suffered from very stiff legs. Egil was living at Mossfell with Grim and Thordis then. One day Egil was walking outdoors alongside the wall when he stumbled and fell. Some women saw this, laughed at him, and said, "You're completely finished, Egil, now that you fall over on your own accord." Grim replied, "Women made less fun of us when we were younger, and I expect they find little of value in our womanizing now." Egil said that things had reached that pass, and he spoke a verse. "My head bobs like a bridled horse, it plunges badly into woe. My middle leg both droops and drips, while both my ears are dry." Egil went completely blind. One winter day when the weather was cold, he went to warm himself by the fire. The cook said it was astonishing for a man who had been as great as Egil to lie around under people's feet and stop them going about their work. "Don't grudge me that I warm myself through the fire," said Egil. "We should make room for each other." "Stand up," she said, "and go off to your bed and leave us to get on with our work." Egil stood up, went off to his bed, and spoke this verse. "Blind I wandered to sit by the fire, asked the flame maiden for peace. Such affliction I bear on the border where my eyebrows cross. Once, when the land-rich king took pleasure in my words, he granted me the hoard that giants warded, gold." Another time, Egil went over to the fire to keep warm, and someone asked him if his legs were cold, and told him not to stretch them out too close to the fire. "I will do that," said Egil, "but I don't find it easy to control my legs now that I cannot see. Being blind is dismal." Then Egil spoke a verse. "Time seems long in passing as I lie alone, a senile old man on the king's guard. My legs are two frigid widows. Those women need some flame." This was at the start of Earl Haakon the Powerful's reign. Egil Skallagrim's son was in his 80s then, and still active apart from his blindness. In the summer, when everyone was preparing to ride to the Thing, Egil asked Grim to ride there with him. Grim was reluctant. When Grim spoke to Thordis, he told her what Egil had asked of him. "I want you to find out what lies behind this request of his," he said. Thordis went to see her kinsman Egil, who by that time had no greater pleasure in life than talking to her. When she saw him, she asked, "Is it true that you want to ride to the Thing, kinsman? I'd like you to tell me everything that you're planning." "I will tell you what I've been thinking," he said. "I want to go to the Thing with the 2 chests full of English silver that King Athelstan gave to me. I'm going to have the chest carried to the Lawbrock when the crowd there is at its biggest. Then I'll toss the silver at them, and I'll be very much surprised if they all share it out fairly among themselves. I expect there'll be plenty of pushing and shoving. It might even end with the whole thing breaking out in a brawl." Þórdis said, "That sounds like a brilliant plan. It will live for as long as people live in Iceland." Then Þórdis went to talk to Grim and tell him about Egil's plan. "He must never be allowed to get away with such a mad scheme," said Grim. When Egil brought up the subject of riding to the thing with Grim, he would have none of it. So Egil stayed at home while the thing was held. He was displeased and wore a rather grumpy look. The cattle at Mossfell were kept in a shieling, and Þórdis stayed there while the thing took place. One evening, when everyone was going to bed at Mossfell, Egil called in 2 of Grim's slaves. He told them to fetch a horse, because I want to go bathe in the pool. When he was ready, he went out, taking his chest of silver with him. He mounted the horse, crossed the hayfields to the slope that begins there, and disappeared. In the morning, when all the people got up, they saw Egil wandering around on the hill east of the farm, leading a horse behind him. They went over to him and brought him home. But neither the slaves nor the chest of treasure ever returned, and there are many theories about where Egil hid his treasure. East of the farm is a gully leading down from the mountain. It has been noticed that English coins have been found in the gully when the river recedes after floods caused by sudden thaws. Some people believe Egil must have hidden his treasure there. Then there are large and exceptionally deep marshes below the hayfields at Mossfell, and it is claimed that Egil threw his treasure into them. On the south side of the rivers are hot springs with big pits nearby, where some people believe Egil must have hidden his treasure, because a will-o'-the-wisp is often seen there. Egil himself said he had killed Grim's slaves and hidden his treasure somewhere, but he never told a single person where it is. In the autumn, Egil caught the illness that eventually led to his death. When he died, Grim had his body dressed in fine clothes and taken over to Tjaldins, where a mound was made that Egil was buried in, along with his weapons and clothes. Grim from Mossfell was baptized when Christianity was made the law in Iceland, and he had a church built at Mossfell. It is said that Þórdis had Egil's bones moved to the church. This is supported by the fact that when a cemetery was dug, after the church that Grim had built at Hrísbrú had been taken down and set up at Mossfell, human bones were found under the site of the altar. They were much larger than normal human bones, and on the basis of old accounts, people are certain they must have belonged to Egil. Skafti Þórarinsson, the priest, a wise man, was there at the time. He picked up Egil's skull and put it on the wall of the churchyard. The skull was astonishingly large, and even more incredible for its weight. It was all rigid on the outside like a scallop shell. Curious to test its thickness, Skafti took a fair-sized hand-axe in one hand and struck the skull with it as hard as he could to try and break it. A white mark was left where he struck the skull, but it neither dented nor cracked. This goes to prove that such a skull would not have been easy for weak men to damage when it was covered with hair and skin. Egil's bones are buried by the edge of the churchyard at Mossfell. Thorstein, Egil's son, was baptized when Christianity came to Iceland, and he had a church built at Borg. He was a devout and orderly man. He grew to an old age, died of illness, and was buried at Borg in the church he had built there. A great family is descended from Thorstein, which includes many prominent men and poets. Thorstein's descendants belong to the Mýrar clan, as do all other descendants of Skallagrim. For a long time it was a family trait to be strong and warlike, and some members were men of great wisdom. It was a family of contrasts. Some of the best-looking people ever known in Iceland belonged to it, such as Thorstein Egilsson, his nephew Kjartan Olafsson, Hall Gudmundarson, and Thorstein's daughter Helga the Fair, whose love Gunnlaug Serpent-Tongue and Hrafn the Poet contested. But most members of the Mýrar clan were exceptionally ugly. Of Thorstein's sons, Thorgir was the strongest, but Skolli was the greatest. He lived at Borg after his father's day and spent a long time on Viking raids. He was at the stem of Earl Eirik's ship, Ironprow, in the battle where King Olaf Tryggvason was killed. Scully fought 7 battles on his Viking raids and was considered to be outstandingly resolute and brave. He went to Iceland afterwards and farmed his borg, where he lived until his old age, and many people are descended from him. And here, the saga ends. Thank you so much, my friends. Quick note, this was translated by Bernard Scudder, and I thank you, Bernard, for translating this for us that we may enjoy and read this age-old tale of Egil. And I want to thank you all for joining me on this journey, and to please check out my other videos where I will be diving deeper into Egil Saga and the different themes in there. I'm excited to dive into those with you and to talk more about these exciting themes of history and of lore and of these great people who lived before us and passed their legacies on to us. I look forward to seeing you then. Ha det!